Welcome, welcome to Catching Up with Conception, where I, Audra Smith, fertility coach, host interviews about all things fertility. Nothing is off limits, and we are here for radical acceptance of the good, the bad, and everything in between in the world of fertility. Now, if you like what you hear today, please subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening. It may not seem like much, but engaging with the content helps so much. Also, if you connect with this content, please reach out so we can help you and meet you wherever you're at. All right, getting to it. Today, we're very excited. We have Seattle-based birth doula Jessica Meeds, and we're going to be talking about the benefits of working with doulas and coaches in the world of making babies. Jessica, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, well, you said my name, Jessica. I'm based in Seattle, and I come alongside families as they get ready to welcome their babies into this world by offering emotional, physical, and informational support that is evidence based so that they can have a very, hopefully, smooth and beautiful experience as they welcome a new family member.
Oh yeah, and I love that evidence-based. I've always said I love my woo with science.
Yeah,
Right?
right.
I think they go hand in hand, so
Yes,
that's great.
absolutely.
Well, so do you prefer Jessica or do you prefer Jess because your handle is Seattle Doula Oh no, it's Seattle Doula Jessica.
Yeah,
I haven't had enough coffee this morning, clearly.
I well, and it's like still dark, so
It
it
yes,
still
forever
feels like
dark.
it's really early. It's the
Oh
forever
yeah,
dark Seattle time. Yeah,
it is, but it's kind of cozy that way.
it is. Yeah.
So Jessica, tell us, like, how does working with a birth doula work? Why would someone want one? I mean,
Yeah.
I know the answer, but let's hear it. What makes a
Well,
birth doula great and worth it?
yeah. I mean, I would say that someone would choose to hire a doula. It just comes down to having someone by your side who's focused solely on you and not just your physical health, but like your overall experience. Um, Sadly, 1 in 3 women describe their birth as traumatic.
Yeah.
And often that's because they feel out of control or really lacked the support they needed. So that's where a doula can make a huge difference. We provide that steady support. We answer questions, bring the calm, right? Help
Mm-hmm.
you feel centered and in control. So, that no matter the outcome, right? Like how your birth happened, like we say, as long as you feel like you're driving the ship and you're the one making the decisions around your birth, that you can still look back on it as a positive experience instead of kind of feeling
I
like you
love
got
that.
side railed, right? Into like,
Ugh,
wait, what happened? What just happened? Um,
yes.
and it all starts with like one decision and that can kind of snowball into another. And so we're there to help you make decisions for yourself, right? Like we're not going to make them
Yeah.
for you, but we're going to give you the information that you need against that evidence-based information to help you make the right decision for you
Mm-hmm.
specifically. And we're not bound by like hospital policies, and things like that.
Yes.
We
So
work
we can push
only.
back,
Yeah, we
but
work only for our
for
clients.
what they want.
Right? Yeah. So, and research shows that having a doula can reduce the likelihood of interventions like epidurals, pitocins, cesareans. So, um, there's studies that show that people with a doula are 39% less likely to need a C-section and
Oh, I love
10%,
that.
yeah, more likely to have a positive view of their birth overall. So,
Oh,
and I
that's
think it's
awesome.
because our support goes beyond like medical, right?
Yes.
We're
Like how you
covering
handle it.
yeah, we're covering like the emotional aspect, the physical. And so it's kind of like having a birth bestie by your side.
Mm-hmm.
We're really accessible to get a hold of. Unlike, a medical provider, you have to like go to my chart or like call the nurse line, and it can take
Yes.
like a long time to get like an
Yeah.
answer of like a
It's like, hey, shoot me a
concern,
text.
right? Yeah, give me a call anytime,
Mm-hmm.
right? I'm there for you. So,
And I like what you meant, what you said about, having, feeling in control, right? Something that I
mm,
talk about with my fertility coaching clients is, my goal is to help them feel empowered and in control of this infertility journey that they're on,
yeah,
as opposed to feeling controlled by it. Because there's so much that's like happening to you, right? But by
absolutely.
being um, made aware of what your options are, where you can push back, where you can say, establishing what your boundaries are. So, kind of like I imagine you help put together birth plans, right? Same thing
Yeah,
with going into fertility stuff, right? Figuring out what your fertility goals are, what you're comfortable with, what you're not comfortable with, and then establishing those boundaries and how to hold them, right? Like, no,
yeah, that's the
I
hard part, right?
especially if it's like, and I say like holding boundaries is a skill, and so it doesn't feel
Absolutely.
natural and it takes
Hmm.
time, right? It takes
Yeah,
practice, but
it sure does.
as hard as and maybe awkward as holding a boundary, I think that it's harder to not, right? So it's choose a
Yeah.
hard that makes you feel empowered, or a
Hmm.
hard that makes you feel like you have no control of the
Oh,
situation.
I love that. I am stealing that.
Please do, please steal it,
Yes, I love that
right?
so much.
Yeah, and so that's what's one of the
Love
things
this.
that I work a lot with, is because there's so many situations, whether it's with your doctor or, for me, the guy at the farmer's market who was like, "Oh, or when are you gonna have some kids?" And I was like, I'm working on it." And he goes, "Well, get on it." Not knowing that I'd had
Yeah.
several losses, and I'm just
Yeah.
standing I'm holding fruits. I'm holding fruits. And I was like, "Well, it's not as easy as they like show on TV." And he's like, "Yeah, it is."
Oh.
I could have just elbowed him. I didn't. I didn't. I did in my mind,
Yeah.
just throwing the fruit at him. And I was like,
Right.
okay. And then I just left, right? Because I
Mm.
can't change his mind. But like
Yeah.
learning how to like maneuver those situations and prepare clients for what to do when you're like, do I just tell him, right? Do I
Hmm.
just drop it in? But yeah, I think having someone who has experience, right, to kind of guide you through that is really helpful.
Hmm.
I do know, that sometimes there's misperceptions of working with a doula, right? I'm sure you've run into that, right? Can
Hmm.
you talk about some of those? Can you
Yeah.
talk about why they're not necessarily the case?
Yeah, I would say like one of the biggest misconceptions of doulas is that like we only support home births, right? And that we only support people who want this just completely like unmedicated, hands off kind of free birth type
Mm-hmm.
situation, and that is just the farthest from the truth. I Most of the births that I attend are hospital births, and our job is to support whatever birth you want, and to
Mm-hmm.
again just make it the best experience possible, right? Like if you want an epidural, like amazing, right? Like
Let's
let's
get you one.
let's get you one, but let's do some things before you get it, right? Let's learn coping techniques so that, because they can't, unfortunately, give you an epidural the moment you go into labor.
No.
Right? So let's learn how to cope and to feel like empowered to take on labor up into the point where you can get that relief that you're hoping for. And then
Mm-hmm.
afterwards, like there's still so many different positional things that we can do, um, to still help support babies as they navigate, the pelvis
Yeah.
and the birth canal. And so I would say that that is a big misconception, and that we are for everyone.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No matter what the birth, what your goals are, right? Our job is to
Hmm.
like find out what those goals are, and then work with you to make that a wonderful experience for you.
Yeah, like it's not Jessica's, doula
Yeah.
birth plan. It's,
Yeah.
Jane Doe's birth plan that
Mhm.
Jessica is supporting, right?
Yes.
Like you're here, we're here for them. It's not what we want. We don't make those decisions. We just help you or help clients and patients figure out what they want
What they want, right? Yeah,
and
and
know what's possible.
yeah, and that's the thing. A lot of people don't even know what their options are, right?
That I wish I had a doula for that. And
Oh,
I
yeah.
researched, like I did so much when I was going through infertility, and then I made a birth plan and I thought I was so prepared.
Yeah.
But when I was pushing, they had me hold my breath, right?
Mm,
And for the 10 seconds or 15 seconds or whatever, I
yeah.
don't have great lungs. I have little baby lungs. And I really struggled with that. And so
Yeah.
that was really hard. And I pushed
Mhm.
for 3 hours so that's 3 hours of like not being able to breathe. And in that moment, like now I know I could be like, no, there's other ways. Even
Yeah.
when I asked, I was like, can we do something else? I wish I had had someone to be like, here's what we're going to do instead,
Yeah.
right? There
Let's
are
try
other
this.
ways.
Let's change it up.
Because
Absolutely.
even the most prepared person on their own, I was like, I'm pretty type A with stuff like that, right? I
Yeah.
like to think that I'm ready to go
Mhm.
in those moments, right? You're just pumped full of hormones and
Oh
you're
yeah.
like, you're not
Yeah.
thinking straight. And so
I would
having
say,
that advocate,
yeah.
everyone deserves that.
Yeah. And it's a very vulnerable moment too, right? Like
Yes.
so vulnerable, and
Right. You're worried
it's
about you. You're worried about your baby.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'm sorry
I
you had
do
that
know,
experience.
I do know that there's an like, when it comes to healthcare providers, that some feel like doulas get in the way, right? So some are not as pro doula. What would you say
Mm.
to that sect of people? Because I know that that's not the case, right? So that's another kind of big misperception. Um, yeah, what would you say against that?
That doulas get in the way of like a medical provider or the
Yeah,
other way
right.
around.
Like, yes, in the way of a medical provider.
Yeah, I mean, our goal is to work with the medical provider, and some are
Mm-hmm.
easier than others, right? And that's why so much of what we do is like beforehand, right? In our own prenatal appointments, where
Mm-hmm.
we're really getting to know each other. And, my job is not to stand there in front of the doctor and say, like, you're not doing this. This is not what my client
Mm-hmm.
wants, right? It's to just constantly remind my client of what their goals are,
Yeah.
and to give them that space to, find the confidence to speak for themselves, and maybe that
I love
means
that. Confidence to speak for themselves. I think that's
yeah, and
beautiful.
sometimes that means asking everyone to kind of leave the room, right? So we can have like a little huddle moment, a
Mm-hmm.
conversation. If it's not an emergency, there's always times to discuss, what's going on, and to ask more questions. And so I always say, like, I don't speak for my clients, um, but I'm there to help them get the information that they need so that they can speak for themselves.
Yeah.
Um,
No, I think that's great. And I love seeing doulas be more of the conversation because I think they serve as an advocate, like
yeah,
in that room, because the doctors are there for you, but they're there to make sure baby gets out okay, right?
yeah,
And
and which we
it's
all want, right? We
we
all want
yes, we
mom
all
and baby to
want.
be healthy, right? But I would say
Hmm.
that's not just the only goal that should be in that room,
Yeah,
right? That's the bare
absolutely.
minimum. The bare
Yeah.
minimum is a healthy mom and baby. There's so much more.
Yes.
And that's an experience that's going to last your entire life, right? Those are like
Mhm.
those memories that you're always going to hold on to, is the
Yes.
birth
That is very true.
of every child you have. And just like,
Mhm.
your wedding day, it's like you want to look back on that is a wonderful, beautiful, magical day.
Yeah. I definitely agree with that, but I I appreciate you kind of talking about that specific kind of misconception because I think it's a big one and I think it's kind of harmful and it makes
Yeah.
some women feel like they can't have it another person in that room um, because it'll upset the doctors or it'll go it against them. But
Yeah.
really, like you are there as an advocate, and
Yeah.
everyone should have advocates.
Yeah.
Everyone, right?
Yeah. And if you're working with a doctor who isn't supportive of what
Mhm.
you need,
Yes.
right? And they're more concerned with what they want than what you want, then it might be a red flag that you should be looking for a different provider, right? They're not all the same. Um,
Hmm.
and that goes with OBs and midwives, and
Yes.
really finding the one that is going to support your whole birth experience. And that means that if you want a doula, that they should be like, absolutely, like
Yeah. Let's have it.
let's let's get you that doula in here. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I love that. So, and is that something that you've worked with people before, like changing doctors, right?
Oh
If they
yeah.
don't feel like where they're at is so I have a video and I joked about the similarities between I think it's Tinder and working with your doctor,
Oh
right? You should swipe left if they've got red flags and they don't feel like the right fit,
yeah.
right? I also met my husband like right as Tinder was a thing, and so I never got to do the swipey left
Me,
thing, and so I feel like
me
I was
too.
like clinging to it. Like this is
They
my
have
way.
one for baby names,
Oh, I
and it's
did know
like,
that. My friend used that. She and her
yeah, like
husband did that.
yes, you and your partner can like swipe at names, and it's like, oh, if you don't both swipe on the name, then it goes like in the garbage pile or something.
Mhm. No, I love
Yeah,
that.
that sounds fun.
But that's so fun.
But yeah, I have clients like switch their entire like where they were even planning on having their baby just after looking at, the
Mhm.
statistics and not being guaranteed to even have their provider in the room.
Oh,
Um, because they're on call, and so most of the time I would say like 90-95% of the time, like you are with a stranger. Um,
yeah.
anyways, and so having a
Yeah,
doula
you
is
are.
that one constant
Mhm.
that you can rely on to be there with you from the beginning to the end. And that's the same even with like um, people who are planning on birthing at a birth center. Sometimes the midwife feels like a situation is not safe for them to stay there, and so they'll transfer them to the hospital, and then their care gets transferred to somebody else, right? But the doula will go with you. Um,
Oh, and I
yeah.
do love that little bit, and I hadn't thought about it, right? A home birth or a birthing center situation, when it gets to a point, like for me personally, I love watching home births. I think they're the coolest thing to
Oh
watch.
yeah.
Terrify the dickens out of me, right? Like that sounds so scary because I think I'm like, well, what happens if it doesn't go as planned? Like what happens?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how you handle that? Like
Yeah,
in the
well,
process of okay, we want to make sure everyone's safe and healthy and taken care of and
yeah, I mean, midwives are so amazing at really kind of seeing like a red flag before it's red, right? Like
yeah.
certain
Oh, that's good.
symptoms
Yeah, like
that are
read the
kind of
signs.
coming up, right? They're maybe like yellow, like this is outside the realm of maybe like normal or healthy. Um, and so most transfers that I see aren't these, huge emergencies where it's like really scary. I mean, those,
Mm-hmm.
occasionally happen way more, way less than you would probably imagine. I mean, just 100 years ago, like all of our ancestors were birthing at home.
Yeah.
Um, but, it does happen. And so most of the time you're able to even just get in your own car and you'll drive to the nearest hospital. Usually birth centers or midwives have specific hospitals that they'll have you transfer to. um, and then the midwife will usually come with and kind of you know be there to hand you over, like giving you the kind of the information, the
Hey,
background,
hold
all
on.
the
Will you hold on one
medical.
second?
Oh yeah.
Sorry, hold on. Okay, I had to stop us because technical difficulties, because life,
Always.
right? We're on the
You just,
internet.
yeah.
But Jessica was talking about home births and,
Transfers.
moving if we need transfers. Thank you.
Yeah.
Transfers.
Yeah. I think I was saying how the midwife will, follow you to the hospital. They, make sure that they fill in, the staff at the hospital with what's kind of going on. And then they leave, but I stay. The doula will stay, right, and see you through the end of the birth. And
Yeah, so you have that consistency.
that, yeah, the continue of care. You have somebody that you know and you trust. And especially in that kind of situation, that can feel really scary.
Yeah.
Um, Having us to like really be that calm um, for you, and to make sure that once again, your goals um, are respected, and that we try to still keep everything as close to what your plan was as possible. So,
Yeah. No, I love that. That's great.
yeah.
So what excuse me, when would you recommend someone connects with a birth doula? Right, if they're like looking into services, when should they call you? Right, is it right
Yeah.
before? Is it, hey, I peed on a stick, there's two lines?
Yeah. I would say I see that full spectrum for sure,
Mm-hmm.
but I always say like the earlier the better, right? Um, I mean, maybe not too early,
Mm-hmm.
but when you hire a doula early on, you're really maximizing your investment. Um, for my clients, the moment of hire is the moment that they have access to my knowledge, and
Yeah.
getting a hold of me. And things come up early on, like, I had a client hire me at, I believe, like 7 weeks. And then she, a couple weeks after that, went on an airplane and wanted like advice on like, what can I do to prepare myself
Yeah.
for going on the airplane? So, um, we're there for your questions, your worries, or even just to share like those exciting moments, right? And
Yeah.
I would say that all of those, interactions really help us build our connection,
Mm-hmm.
which makes a big difference, so that when labor starts, like we feel more like friends rather than just
Yeah.
acquaintances, which like creates not just that comfortable environment, but like a trusting environment,
Mm-hmm.
which is so important in the birth space.
Very
Um,
much so.
yeah, so it allows us to just really build that rapport and establish that, solid support system that my clients can count on. Yeah.
Speaking of that safe space, there is an account on Instagram and she's so great. And I think it's Shanna or Shauna or something. And she role plays as a mother in law who is maybe a little pushier when
Oh,
it
yeah.
comes to, the grandchildren or the children in her lives.
Hmm.
Um, how do you handle the mother in law or the mother, right? Or the parent that says, I'm going to be there for the birth of my grandbaby? How do we handle that when the birthing parents are a little less enthused at having them there.
Well, that's tricky, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that's why it's so important to talk about like boundaries beforehand, right? Uh, Boundaries are really helpful for relationships. They're very
They are.
kind, you
They
know.
are.
Um, they don't always feel like it. It can
Yes.
be really hard to create those boundaries, but if somebody were to just like show up, right? Like my job would, if that's what my client wants is for me, I'm never going to just speak on their behalf, but if
Yeah.
they, ask me to like handle the situation, like I would say that, that birth space is so intimate. It
Yes.
should mimic how the baby got in. The baby gets out the same way baby got in, right? That same like intimate experience, the dim lights, the quiet, that safe, feeling safe,
Mm-hmm.
right? And if you had all these eyes on you, you probably wouldn't feel that safe.
Well,
And
so
so,
I am just going to counter you just a tiny little bit
oh,
because the way
okay.
that my daughter was conceived, there
Uh-huh.
were lots of lights
That's true,
and lots
right?
of people
Yeah.
going through IVF, right? And it is
Yeah.
very like, it was very clinical, right? Uh,
Absolutely.
but I did, I got to have my support person, right? And
Mhm.
so I got to choose that and choose
Yeah.
who that was.
Oh, and that's wonderful, right?
Yes.
That you got to do that.
So
Um,
yeah, it was not the most serene of how the baby got here, uh,
yeah.
but I did get to feel comfortable with who I had in that room and
Yeah.
feel like control over who I had in that. And so in that sense, I'm right on board, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
you want to have control of who is there when the baby
Yeah.
gets made
And
and
you
when the baby comes out.
absolutely should have that control.
Hmm.
Which is another reason why it's like really important to kind of figure out like where you're gonna have your baby and like what they allow, like as far as like support people.
Yeah,
Because some
that's
people
true.
really want everybody there, right? They're like, I want my mom, I want my sister, I want my spouse or my partner, I want my doula, and making
Yeah.
sure that
You
they
want your
allow
people.
that as well. But I would say that, um, especially in the early labor, that oxytocin is that like driver of birth.
Yes.
And
Get all
so
the love, all
having
the hugs.
having a lot of distractions and noise and talking can really kind of stall that. And that's usually my out for when people don't want,
Mm,
too many people there, is just like,
yeah.
hey, we're really
Scapegoat the
trying to
science.
keep this vibe going. And, the less eyes, the less voices, the better. And so maybe later, but maybe not. Um,
And you have such a calm presence about you. I'm sure you've
oh,
heard this, but you just feel very comforting and
oh,
calm.
well,
And
thank
like,
you.
I could see that presence being such like a bonus to anyone
Yeah.
in that situation who is like, there's a baby pushing on my pelvis. This is
Yeah.
my mother won't leave. Like it's loud. There's sounds. I like,
And
the
I
whole
always
gambit.
offer too to like, hey, give me your number and let me give you the updates on what's going on at least, right? Um,
No, I love that full service,
yeah,
right?
absolutely.
No, I know that like when I am working with clients, right? So I offer services from okay, we are starting, we're at the fertility clinic, we're trying to make sense of all of it.
Mm,
Um, and then tend to try and stick with them, or I'm able to stick with them until they get released into to their like OB or their midwife.
uh-huh.
Usually if they're working with fertility clinics, right, they sometimes will have a MFM, um, maternal fetal medicine doctor. I had to think of what the
Oh,
acronyms
uh-huh.
were. And then are going the route of having an OB as opposed to a midwife, just
Yeah.
because
Yeah,
there's like more
absolutely.
um, monitoring. And that's
Yeah.
something that I really advocate as well, and something that I found in my own experience. um I had to switch OBGYNs because my first loss was not taken seriously and I ended up in the emergency room.
Mm,
And so when I found a new
mhm.
one, I said, give me the nicest, most supportive doctor you have.
Yeah.
And it was a man, and he was great, and it was fine.
Mhm.
But when I did move to back to his office, I think it was 10 weeks. He said to me, "Call me. Any concerns,
Oh,
like
that's amazing.
any worries, we will get you in." And
Yeah.
so that's one of the things that I really
I
advocate
love
for
that. What a
my clients,
beautiful doctor.
yeah, to look for, um, once they are making that transition. Because having that support kind of when they transition, to the doctor's
Mhm.
office, can really make all the difference.
Yeah.
But what I like to have my clients do, once they do get pregnant, once they've stayed pregnant, and it's starting to look like, hey, this is working, right? Because some of the clients, it's,
Mhm.
hey, I can't get pregnant. Okay.
Yeah.
And so once that happens, we start looking into birth doulas so they can have that continued support. For some, it's the struggle to stay pregnant, which is
Mhm.
where I, ran into issues. And so literally until I heard the sound of my daughter's voice, right, I was
Oh,
not sure that it was there,
yeah.
that
Like,
it
is
was
this
gonna.
real? Is this happening?
But
Yeah.
I like to have them reach out, once we're at 6 or 7 weeks. Let's start to
Mhm.
make that connection so that once once they have kind of transitioned out of the world of a fertility clinic
Yeah.
into the world of OBs, um, they have someone that's a little more targeted and prepared, and like that is their realm, birth
Mhm.
doula, as opposed to my lane is pretty much because I can, right? But the little world of infertility and that little
Yeah,
kind of
once you
6 months
kind of
of time,
yeah.
it's good that we have our niches. It's good that we have our jams, and I
Yeah.
like that I can say, hey, let's call Jessica. We've got a baby. It's
Oh,
growing. We're doing good.
yes. Yeah,
Right. So do you get a lot of do you work with a lot of patients, or I guess clients that have struggled with fertility or
I
struggle with
have.
secondary infertility?
Yeah. Mhm. Both. Yeah. And that's, delicate, right? There's a lot more fears, absolutely, right, that come along um, with that. And so just, it's really important that they feel safe to like share that
Hmm.
stuff with me, right? And we sometimes will handle the prep for that birth a little bit different, right? We got like some fears and emotions that
Hmm.
we need to work through um, before we go into labor, and also, the end of pregnancy can be a little more delicate as well, as
Yeah.
far as providers um, suggesting, induction and things. When you go past your due date and things like that. So
Oh,
there's definitely different things to take
yeah.
into account when working um, with clients who have experienced what you and many others have, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, yeah,
Yeah,
it's a far too common for a crummy club that no one wants to be
I
in.
know.
But we have shirts.
I love
So,
that.
yes, this
Love
is
the shirt.
from a
Did you do
super
that?
awesome. I also have a sticker, and I have a sweatshirt. Also, infertilities or infertilities. I always say it wrong, and I'll like tag it here. But I love all their stuff, and I would have bought way more, but I was like, all right, I can't.
That's
But
awesome.
speaking of Protect IVF,
Yes.
speaking of, kind of concerns around family planning, you can't escape it. right? In
Yeah.
today's political climate, what do you say to people who are concerned that their family planning is going to be impacted by legislation? I mean, thankfully, so we're in Washington, right? And
Yeah.
so at the moment, like there's no federal legislation against it, and we don't have state legislation against it, but
Yeah.
I'm sure it's a concern.
Yeah, that's what with the overturning of Roe, right? That took it out of the federal hands and put it in to the state's hands.
Yes.
So that's a really important question. My job as a doula, right, is to offer evidence-based information. That's why I make sure that I get my information from government websites, manufacturer inserts, and other reliable sources that aren't swayed by bias, um, or
I love
outside,
that, not swayed by bias,
yeah,
which is hard.
or outside influences. And so I would encourage you to do the same when it comes to this conversation, right? Like, get your information directly from the legislation itself. Read it.
Hmm.
What does it actually say in your state? And then get involved.
I
It
love that.
is so important to stay aware of like who is in office, what do they stand for. Elections in the US happen more than just every 4 years. There's like
Yes, we've got.
there's local,
Hmm.
state, and federal elections every 2 years. So, and sometimes even more frequently, like depending in your area. So,
Yeah.
like, those can directly impact policies on family planning. So, find out what's happening.
Hmm.
Where can you step up and reach out
And
to the
there's yeah, and
people
there's so
who,
many organizations that you can get involved in, that you can
yeah,
donate to.
yeah.
Resolve is great. Planned Parenthood is great. Um, I I put a list. I put out a list a couple days ago. I can't. Maybe a week ago. Well, by the time this comes out, it'll have been a few weeks ago. But of some different sites that specific, focus on, criminal, or I'm mixing my degrees, that focus on reproductive justice and, informing people of what's going on and access to reproductive care and things like that. And so you're right. I'll link some somewhere.
Awesome.
I don't know,
Yeah, that's
because you want
wonderful.
people to be informed.
Yeah, yeah, and
That
there's a lot out there that is true, not true, right? And it's like the one way that you can kind of weed through that is to just go directly to the source. What does the legislation in your state actually say? And like become familiar with the wording. And that can take a lot of work,
it
but
does.
it's really important,
I
um,
agree.
to take
And I
that
wish it
time,
weren't so hard, but
right? It shouldn't be so hard.
I
Yeah.
think there's a line from either Lord of the Rings or Hobbit or something, and this is gonna show my dorkiness, but it's okay.
I love
Um,
The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, so
Amazing. Okay, good.
I guess I'm the
Where
dorky.
Gandalf, where one of the hobbits says, like, I wish we didn't have to do this. I don't want to do this. And Gandalf is like, well, no one who lives in times like these wishes they were in
Mm,
times like these.
yeah,
You just have to do with it what you can.
yeah,
And so that is something that I have kind of clinged to lately.
yeah. But we're
But
here for a reason, right?
oh yeah,
In this
we can
time
help.
for a reason. So,
On a lighter note, what is your favorite part about being a birth doula? Do you have
oh,
like a favorite or like a wildest story that you can share?
man, I love every part of my job, I would say. I mean, being on
Right?
call can sometimes be challenging, but
Yeah, I could see that.
um, I would say like witnessing the connection like between partners during birth. Um, like there's just something so incredibly beautiful about like seeing people's love for each other on display in like such a
Oh,
raw and unfiltered way.
oh, I
It's just like
love
a
that.
moment when everything else fades, right? And you just
Yeah.
truly like see the depths of like their care for each other. And so I would just say it's like something I never take for granted of like the privilege of being present in that
Mm-hmm.
sacred of a space. It's just such an inspiring thing to witness.
It
I
probably feels
always
like a
like
hug.
miss my family and my babies and
Oh, I'm
my husband when I'm
sure.
at a birth. I'm like, oh, I can't wait to go home and just like love on everybody. Like I just like
Yes,
it refuels my love tank um, for
I
my
bet.
family too, and it's the best thing in the world. Um, yeah,
Yeah,
I
and
love
little
it.
babies. That's always fun.
Oh my goodness, little babies. I
Such
don't have to
cute little
have
babies.
any more kids because I just always get to see babies being born.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so it kind of it's good for me. We have four, so I'm like, we don't
Yeah.
need any more.
Yeah,
But
and you
I
get to
get
go
to get
see
my
those, right?
baby fix like all the time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
What is that? What is your favorite part? I mean, wow, what
So I
a
think,
critical
God,
role you play.
so one of my favorite parts, I think, is actually after I've done the bulk of of working with them. I love all of it, right? I am an educator by nature. I am an advocate by nature, right? I want to help people be the best and
Yeah.
have their best
Yeah, you're
selves,
a
right? But
teacher, right? Like that's
yeah,
your
I
background.
I love teaching, and I won't go into all of that, but
Yeah.
I love I love being able to educate and teach and help people feel like in control of their
I love
understanding and their
that.
knowledge and everything.
Yeah.
But um I love the texts and the pictures that happen after that say,
Mm,
I just had a baby, right? I got one of those texts a couple days ago, and it just is like they're the best things ever, right? Because it's like, and that's so when I work with clients, right? They I'm there, right? Like it does not matter if we are not like having our regular sessions, if
yeah.
you're already with a birth doula or it's 5 years down the road, right?
Yeah.
I'm here, right? And so being able to get those updates and see like, hey, all of this work that they've done, like they did it, right?
Yeah.
They got their little bundle, um, and it feels like a validation for them, but it's like a validation for me, and it's like, hey,
Mhm.
we're doing good things, right? We're
Which, oh man, I just have to say, like, that's got to be really incredible for you. Like, because I see them after they already, right? Like, there's already a
mm-hmm.
baby.
Yeah.
We know the baby's coming. And for you to see, like, their struggles and, their
Yeah.
worries and then to have that come full circle, wow, what a
Yes.
special moment.
And I
Um,
think it's also very personal for me because I know what that feels like.
yeah,
I know
yeah,
working and trying so hard, and I know the highs and lows and all of it. And so to be able to have that, to be able to say, I had a baby, or like,
mhm,
and sometimes, it goes the way of surrogacy or adoption. And whatever that looks like, it's I have a baby in my arms, and this is my baby, right? Because I
yeah.
get those too, and it just
Oh,
it's such an awesome thing to kind of see that the family goals have been met,
yeah.
right? And however we
Oh,
got there, right, they've been met. And so that would, I would say, my most favorite. And I love all of it, like you said.
yeah.
um but yeah, that's probably my favorite, because again, babies.
Yeah.
Well, so I will close with a
Okay.
call to action. Tell us what you've
Sure.
got going on. Where do we find more information about you? Like, give us your stuff, Jessica Meeds.
Yeah. So, I mean, I just have all the babies coming up. I got a full schedule through January. Most doulas only take so many births a month, right? It just
Yeah.
um,
Because you can only
limits
be in
the
so many places at
chance,
once.
right? It limits the chance that we'd have to use a backup, and it also gives us like the ability to give like 100% to our clients, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, but I'm I have a spot in February, March, and then in the spring, summer. I'm on Instagram,
Yeah, what's
Seattle.
your Instagram handle? What's your website? I'm going to
Yeah,
tag it all,
they're the
but
same. Seattle Doula Jessica. Yeah.
love
So
it.
I share a lot of information on my Instagram.
It's a good
Uh,
Instagram.
oh, thank you. Yeah, a lot of that evidence based information that is free, right? Like, so if you can't hire a doula, like find some doulas on Instagram or TikTok or Facebook, whatever your favorite
Mm-hmm.
is, right? Follow them and just learn, right? I just can't um, stress that enough. It's like learn as
Be
much as you
prepared.
can about birth. Be prepared. Yeah, because there is definitely a gap between the information you get from a provider and the information you actually need to have a birth that you can look back on and feel proud about.
Very true.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. Thank
Well,
you so
it
much.
was so wonderful chatting.
All right.
Thank you so
Yes.
much.
Yeah. And that's a wrap on this week's episode of Catching Up with Conception with me, Audra Smith, fertility coach. I want to thank you for joining us and ask you to subscribe to this podcast on whatever app you're listening on. It may seem small, but it really does make a big impact. Catch me on Instagram and TikTok at Fertility Coach Audra and on our next episode of Catching Up with Conception.